Thank you very much, Professor O, and I also want to thank Dr. Lim also for that wonderful talk. So my talk is just heard from Dr. Lim, and so I will delve a little deeper here into some of the challenges having to do with some of the big numbers that are associated with cars and with driving. In particular, 1 billion cars and 10 trillion miles. So let me begin sort of like we're in a class and ask some questions. How many people are on planet Earth? And I don't want the exact number, just order of magnitude. What factor of 10? So, but factors of 10. Let's call it 10 billion. Actual number 7.5, something like that, but powers of 10, 10 billion. What's our lifespan in years? Again, factors of 10, 100 years, actually around 71, average around the world, a little bit more in certain countries. How many people die every year around the world? Well, let's see, if there's 10 billion of us and we live 100 years, what do? You divide one by the other and you get 100 million. The actual number is around 53. But that's because we're not in steady state population. If you look at the number of births per year, again, order of magnitude 100 million, actual number 131 million. And that's because, of course, our population is rising. So 100 million people a year, order of magnitude, is many people a year that die. And of course, every single one of them, it's extremely sad, but it's a very, very big number. How many car fatalities per year are there? How many of us die in automobiles? It's around 1 million, actual number around 1.25 million, but that's 10 to the 6th instead of 10 to the 8th, so roughly 1%. And if you work that out to how many per day, you take 1.25 million, you divide by 365, you get around 3,400 people per day die in car accidents. So for those of us from the United States, we are particularly struck by the tragedy of September 11th, and the number of people who died on September 11th is approximately the same, somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000. And so it's around the world, it's like September 11th happens every single day. That's how many people die in car accidents. It's a remarkably high number. But still, you may ask, if it's only between 1% and 2% of all fatalities, why is this important? Why is reducing car fatalities important? And the answer is that most people die of other causes strongly related to age. There's a bunch of young people who die in less developed parts of the world, and of course many people who die of old age. But car accidents are different. Car accidents tend to affect people independent of age. And so this picture here was taken with Eric Krodkoff and James Kuffner and Andy Seidel joining me at a ceremony that the leadership of Toyota has every year near Nagano in Japan at a Buddhist shrine in Tatashina. And this is actually with a picture we took with the priest who's there. He's a very serious man. But he gave a wonderful description of why car fatalities are so tragic. And this shrine is dedicated to praying for people who are dying in car accidents. And the reason is that when you die of an illness, when you are old, you have time usually to consider your life, to review your life, to share it with your loved ones, and to prepare for your death. But in a car accident, usually it happens in a moment, and there is no preparation at all. So from his perspective, the great tragedy is that car accidents affect people of all ages. That's one particular view of it, but in general, the view is borne out by some statistics. Here's some statistics for car accidents and deaths for U.S. teenagers aged 12 to 19 in the United States. You look at these pie charts, the one on the left-hand side, unintentional injury is around 48% of all deaths of teenagers, and of those 48%, around 73% are caused by car accidents. And so automobile crashes account for around 35% of US teenager fatalities. And so this is the reason that this is so important. It's not good enough to look at the bulk statistics of how many people die in car accidents versus other causes. You have to look at particular age groups. And so my conclusion from all this, which I am willing to bet all of you share, is that as a community in robotics, we need to fix this problem. This is something that I think the robotics community and scientists and engineers, people in academia, in industry, can solve better than anybody else in any other field in the world. We know how to resolve this thing. So let me ask a rhetorical question. Are driverless cars the answer? If you're a scientist or an engineer and you want to solve this problem, is the answer driverless cars? Okay, I'll play my game of orders of magnitude again. How many cars in the world? Order of magnitude. 1 billion. Roughly 10 times less than the number of people. A lot of cars. How many miles does each car drive every year? Well, it's not 1,000. It's not 100,000. That's usually the life of a car. Maybe 10,000? Order of magnitude. Okay? You could just do this off the top of your head. Okay. How many miles or kilometers, it doesn't matter for order of magnitude, does each car travel every year? And if we say all the cars in the world, multiply them together, 10 trillion miles. 10 to the 13th power. So all cars in the world travel a tremendous amount. This is a very big number. So how many miles per fatality? You remember there are around 1 million fatalities per year. So you divide those two numbers, you divide 1 trillion by 1 million, you get from 10 trillion, it goes down to 10 million. So 10 million miles per fatality per year, or actually, I'm sorry, per fatality for human-driven cars. That's global. In the US, in Japan, other cars that have good highways and safety systems, the number is approximately 10 times better. So instead of 10 million miles per fatality, it's around 100 million miles per fatality. 100 million miles. That's a lot of miles. And in fact, if you remove drunk driving, drowsy driving, and distracted driving, you go up another factor of 10, and it becomes around 1 billion miles per fatality. And this is for human-driven cars. So the conclusion from this is that humans are remarkably safe drivers. Remember what my question is. Are autonomous cars the answer? Well, possibly, but they have to beat people. And people can drive 1 billion miles between fatalities. So humans are remarkably safe. Non-drunk, non-drowsy, non-distracted humans are even safer. So building a driverless car that's safer than a human driver is likely to be very difficult. It's a wonderful aspiration, and it's an aspiration that we at TRI are working towards, as is Hyundai, as is every car manufacturer I know, Google, Uber, by rumor, Apple. We're all working on it, but it's likely to be extremely hard. And the reason is that our brains, our eyes, are very, very good. And so we shouldn't underestimate the difficulty of the problem. Okay, how about testing? How many miles do we have to test until we actually know that our autonomous car is better? As is true for Hyundai, Toyota, we have our own test facilities that we use for testing autonomous cars. There are many government facilities. There's one in Michigan, which is very good, that we use, as well as other manufacturers. But if you work out the numbers, in order to prove that your autonomous car is better than a human-driven car, you have to test 8.8 billion miles. If you had a fleet of 100 test cars, which is pretty big, running for 24 hours a day, it would take you 400 years to test that many miles. So probably that kind of testing isn't going to work. Let's compare it to what other companies have done. How many miles driven by Google? Order of magnitude 1 million. Actual number, they just passed the 2 million mile mark. Remember, the number that you need to test, 8.8 billion. So we're still off by a lot. Tesla is actually doing better because they have a fleet of cars that are out there. And so they say that they've driven around 200 million miles, order of magnitude 100 million, so that's better. But for all of these miles, we have to keep in mind something to do with statistics. The Tesla system is a level 2 autonomy system. It's only engaged when the driver says, I want to use it now. And drivers select the time that they use it based on when the car will perform well in autonomous mode. And so there's a tremendous selection bias in level 2 systems like the Tesla system. And so it's not fair to compare the number of miles that are driven when the autonomy is turned on selectively by a human being with the total miles that are driven by people in all circumstances. Likely not representative. It's even true of the Google system. That one is a little better because they tend to use it more. But most of their testing is when the weather is good and the traffic is not so bad. And so it's not representative of actual traffic all around the world. So our hypothesis at TRI is that most driving is easy, but some driving is very, very hard. And so what you see in this picture here with the microscope is where TRI is investing all of our effort. We are not focusing on the easy driving because we know how to do that, but we're focusing on the hard driving. And we know that we can't test enough hard driving in the real world, so we are augmenting our driving in the real world with driving in simulation. And so we have a very large effort in computer simulation in order to test autonomous driving. Google does the same thing. We've heard other companies are beginning to do it as well. Our effort is particularly strong. So don't be fooled. Don't be fooled by demonstrations of autonomous driving because most of the demonstrations are done where the driving is easy. And in fact, some driving is extremely hard and people are remarkably good at it. So that's sort of the first conclusion. The next question I want to ask is, maybe there's another way. And it was wonderful to see the talk by Dr. Lim explaining how they use ADAS, which is driving assistance and support systems, in order to help cars become safer, because we agree very much with this kind of approach. I learned about this when I was at DARPA, and I learned about different kinds of shared control between a human being and a robot. And in this particular case, I have it as shared control between two agents. Since I grew up as an electrical engineer by training, I think of this as series autonomy and parallel autonomy, like resistors in series or resistors in parallel. In series autonomy, you have two agents. You have a commander and you have a subordinate. Think of it like a parent and a child, and they're playing golf. And the parent tells the child, hit the ball over there. And then the child takes over and the child does the task. You can sort of see how the child is in series between the parent and the task to be done. If we skip to the bottom, which is the dual, parallel autonomy, we have the two agents working collaboratively with their forces summing together, in this case the parent and the child holding the golf club together, and their forces and torques sum on the handle of the golf club. And the phrase is, I'll help you swing. And somewhere in the middle is this turn-taking autonomy, like a pilot and a co-pilot, and they switch roles back and forth, which one is in charge. So these are three particular modes that I studied at DARPA, and we worked on both of them. I'll show you some videos of each one. This first one is going to be series autonomy. This was several years ago. This is a robot from the Autonomous Robotic Manipulation Program at DARPA. This particular software was from JPL, and here the robot changed a tire all by itself. This, of course, is nothing new now. It's several years old. But, of course, the commander told the robot, change the tire, and the robot did the rest. Series autonomy. This was parallel autonomy. And this was done by University of Pittsburgh and CMU, And here we have a patient with a human-machine interface to her brain, actually, because she's a quadriplegic. And on the left, she is trying to move the white box onto the white square using brain waves, and actually a neural implant inside of the motor system of her brain. And you can see that it doesn't work very well. What we did in our program is we had autonomy that worked in parallel with her, and the autonomy observed what she was trying to command the robot to do, and if it was a little bit off, it sort of added a little force and torque to try to bring her to the intended place. And so what you'll see is that it's much more successful on the right than it is on the left. In fact, it works every time on the right, and it never works at all on the left. The intriguing thing about this experiment was we switched the autonomy on and off at random, and we asked her each time at the end, did you do this by yourself, or did you do it with the help of the autonomy? Her answers were uncorrelated to whether or not we actually switched it on or off. So she felt that she had the agency, she was responsible for doing the task, even when, in fact, the computer was helping her. But the key thing here is the autonomy was in parallel, not in series. Both of them kind of working on the arm at the same time. This particular program had a final demonstration which was quite impressive. Here are the people that worked on it. It was Drew Bagnell and also Professor Schwartz at the University of Pittsburgh. And here she is using the robot arm in order to open a door. And this is the first time this was ever done. You can see her head in the lower right-hand side with the brain interface coming out of her motor system in her brain. And she's managing to open the door using that. This would not have been possible if we only had her neural implant controlling the arm, but we had a combination working in parallel of autonomy and the neural implant. So how does this apply to cars? I learned all this at DARPA, then I took a job at Toyota, and of course we all learn things and then we bring that understanding to our next job. And it occurred to me that the trouble with using traditional autonomy to solve the safety problem in cars is that it's series autonomy. And maybe in the same way that we explored parallel autonomy in the case of the ARM program, we could explore parallel autonomy in terms of cars as well. And so we made up a name for this. We call it the Guardian system, and it is the dual of the chauffeur system. Instead of the autonomy being between the driver and the car, which is what traditional car autonomy is, the autonomy is in series and in parallel and acts together with the driver. A number of different aspects of this are very important to go over. When I joined Toyota, the president of Toyota, Akio Toyoda, told me he wants to make sure cars are still fun to drive. Well, if you are a passenger in a chauffeur-driven car with series autonomy, the car is essentially a train. But if you're driving a car with the Guardian technology, it's actually more fun to drive because the Guardian will save you if you have a problem, and if you want to drive aggressively, you can do so. Duty cycle, quite different. The autonomy in chauffeur has to work 100% of the time. The autonomy in the Guardian only acts if an accident is about to occur. In terms of liability, this is my own opinion, not those of lawyers, but the liability for a chauffeur system, of course, is with the manufacturer. But for the Guardian system, it's mostly the driver. How good does the system need to be? The chauffeur needs to be 100% good all of the time. The Guardian system, in general, does not always need to be successful. If you're going to have an accident anyway, the standard for a Guardian is don't make it worse. Do no harm. Anti-lock brakes on your car are a primitive example of a Guardian system. They work in parallel with you, changing the amount of force that goes on the brake pedal in parallel. But they don't guarantee you won't have an accident. They just don't make it worse. And they try to make it better. And so it's a different kind of a standard. How about how soon we can start saving lives? The difficulty with the chauffeur approach is that until it works sufficiently that you can deploy it in a level 4 or level 5 system, you're not saving any lives. In the case of the Guardian system, we've already saved many lives. Anti-lock brakes, stability control, automatic emergency braking, all of these things are different methods that Professor Lim or Dr. Lim spoke about before with the ADAS systems. What we believe is that we can take those much further, bringing the car to true intelligence and having a Guardian on the side in parallel with you that prevents you from having an accident. In fact, our goal is to make a car that will not cause a crash, no matter how bad a driver you are. So imagine a car where you can close your eyes, turn the wheel, step on the accelerator, and nothing bad will happen. That's how good we want to get. Are we there yet? No. But we think that there's a series of steps that we can take in order to get there. Finally, in terms of humans and robots working together, we think this is very important. In the chauffeur system, you ignore the skills of the human being. In the Guardian system, we use the skills of the human being as much as possible and only intervene. Keep in mind, for many years, the Guardian will not be as safe as a human being. So we're going to count on the human most of the time, but when the human clearly makes a mistake, we'll use the slightly less competent but different skills of the Guardian to try to improve the situation, which can only be made better. And that's very important. If you have two agents, one that's very reliable and one that's less reliable, which of them should guard the other? And we think the answer for the near future is the autonomy should guard the human being. Finally, there's a thing called the handoff problem, which every single one of us working in this area has issues with, which is when the autonomy runs into a circumstance in driving that's too difficult, it goes beep, 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 and hands the car back to the human driver. But what if the human driver is not ready? The human driver may be texting on the phone. We saw that in one of the movies before. The human driver may be asleep. We've seen that in some movies of other cars being used this way. We have to make sure that we don't have this handoff problem. Guardian systems tend not to have that because the human is driving all the time. So let me show you kind of a growth curve here of how we plan to do this. We believe that both series and parallel approaches are important. Both the chauffeur and the Guardian are important. For aging society, for people who cannot drive, for people who are blind, we have to have the chauffeur eventually. But we think that there's a lot that we can do with parallel Guardian technologies significantly beyond where the ADAS systems are right now in order to get there. And so this is the Toyota Research Institute's planned evolution of this system. Finally, I'll conclude with what we're planning to do. We actually have three big goals. Number one, improve safety. And for that, here's a picture of the Guardian or the Guardian Angel approach. Number two, we want to improve access to cars. Make it so that anybody can benefit from the mobility of a car. We need the chauffeur for that, but because it's so hard, and I hope I've convinced you how hard it's going to be, we want to have the Guardian until we have the chauffeur. And then finally, as is the case with Hyundai, we have been working for many years on robotics as well, and around 1/3 of TRI's efforts is going into robotics to diversify Toyota from mobility outdoors to mobility indoors, particularly for aging society. This is a picture of a HSR robot here in a demonstration from several years ago. We're going to be giving out several of these robots in the year to come in RoboCup and developing robots beyond the HSR as well. Since this is an academic conference, I'll conclude with some further reading if you want to learn a little more about it. A colleague of mine at MIT, David Mindell, wrote a wonderful book recently called Our Robots Ourselves, Robotics and the Myths of Autonomy. And the latter third of this book is all about this issue of series versus parallel autonomy and the advantages of parallel autonomy. And in terms of the statistics and the selection bias that we have as a result of the way some of the statistics are being thrown around, there was a very good article recently in the Washington Post that asked the question of whether you're safer in a Tesla on autopilot, and let's do the math that talks about some of these issues. I don't have any particular criticism of Tesla. It's just one of many manufacturers who are working on this together. I think it's very important, though, that when the public thinks about, and when we as roboticists talk about these safety issues, that we really try to not fall prey to fallacies of statistics. And that tends to happen very easily if you're not careful. And with that, thank you very much. Why don't you come up here with me?
So we have plenty of time for discussion. Any questions or comments on the floor? Okay.
Professor
Thank you very much. Very nice overview. I know what you're doing, the DARPA, also here. That's right. So I'm Toshi Fukuda from Navy, and also I'm a TC chair on Robotic Automation Society here on energy, environment, and safety technology in robotics automation. Yes. That's why I'd like to ask you some questions. Quite a kind of 10 years ago, or more than 10 years ago, what happened? That kind of aircraft, have such a shared sort of control, autonomous. And then pilot have such a manual control. They're fighting. Yes. During the fighting, they crashed down. Yes. And one of the people died. That's in Nagoya, where I am. That's a kind of thing, very important, shared. And it's a kind of nice to see how such a level we can have. So that's what you say, very intelligent, fun to drive, great. But the autonomous car cannot allow us to have a spin, stopping, like that. That's a kind of, that's a fun to drive, but the autonomous car cannot do that. At this moment, Google car, Tesla cannot anyway. Even level 4, they not allow us to have such a spin, but stopping, like that, right? So that's a good thing. So how do you think such a level of those things in your car? See, like that. I just want to know such a kind of a shared such a thing versus such a fun to drive in your figure.
Okay. Thank you very much, Professor Fukuda. There is a very interesting and difficult question for parallel autonomy that we are only beginning to solve now. We have feedback loops between two controllers and the car. We have the human being who's trying to drive, and we have the autonomy which is trying to save the human being from an accident in parallel. And many difficulties can arise. You can have something in aircraft called pilot-induced oscillation, where the two sides, like you said, are fighting with each other. And so we must figure out how the hybrid control system of the two controllers working together will work. And we must make sure that it is stable and correct for the whole range of human drivers. Some people may drive with high gain, some people may drive with low gain. It must work with everything regardless. And so you're correct that a parallel autonomy system has to deal with this dual control issue, which is a little more difficult than what the series control system does, where it just takes over 100%. But I think that we can do it. We have done some investigation in this, and we think it's possible. We also think that worst case, you can switch to turn taking, where you have the human being turn off, and then you turn on the autonomy, and then go back to the human being. So it can do that middle type of turn-taking autonomy if necessary. But we think a smoother blending can be done also. With regard to fun to drive, it's true, right now, the autonomy systems stay out of the difficult areas where the car is skidding. But if the autonomy system had a good model, a predictive model of the dynamics of a car in a spin, which is what a good race car driver has in their head, perhaps in the future the autonomy system could also use spin or other skidding in order to drive the car. We haven't experimented with this yet, but certainly if human beings can do it well, in the future maybe the autonomy could also. Thank you.
We have a couple more minutes, so we can take one question.
Yeah.
You?
Hello.
Go ahead.
Hello, Dr. Pratt. My name is Aditya. I'm from San Jose State University, California. Thank you for the talk. And from my understanding, it is, I believe that you're not completely working on a self-driving technology, but it's a shared autonomy, right? What I would like to know is your take on the fact that some companies are completely focused on self-driving technology. In that sense, what's your take on situations where a car and a computer on it requires a moral engine where it has to decide whether it has to save the driver or a 3-year-old kid in front? And also, I would expect you to validate or invalidate certain factors such as whether the driver has this credit rating, and in that situation, how much of liability is being supported by the insurance companies and things like that. Thank you.
So there were two questions there. The first one was on what's called the trolley problem, which is a problem in philosophy where a person has to decide whether or not to throw the switch on a train track for a trolley to either kill one person or kill the other person. And an interesting question is, can AI ever be good enough to rival human ethic decision-making? It's an interesting question, but I don't think it's the most important one for this field. And the reason is that first, these situations will be extremely rare. Second, human beings are not very good at doing this answer to begin with. People tend to react very emotionally, and they also react without even thinking when situations like this arise quickly. So I think that it's a bit of an academic question, but not very much of a practical question. There are other questions which I think are much more serious about whether AI systems can be good enough to rival human beings for autonomous driving. I will give you one of them. An autonomous car is driving down the road, and its sensors see a person and another person on the sidewalk. The autonomous system must decide, do I think that they will try to cross the road, even though there is no light, or will they wait? Now, we as human drivers have tremendous experience in modeling the intentions of a human being on the side of the road. If it's two teenagers with skateboards, we think it is likely that they will cross against the law without waiting for the light. If it's a mother with a child in her hand, we think it's not likely she will cross. And we change our driving behavior based on a very sophisticated understanding and modeling of other human beings. It's going to be difficult for AI systems to do the same thing. Perhaps we can solve it with a lot of training, a lot of data, to use deep learning and machine learning to solve this problem. But right now, we don't have the theory of mind that human beings have in our artificial intelligence systems. So I'm not so worried about the trolley problem, but much more concerned about theory of mind issues for the computer in the car to best predict how other human beings will act.
Okay, there are many requests in the floor. The last one, okay, just 1 minute.
All right. Thank you, Gil, for a fantastic talk. This is Ravi Balasubramanian from Oregon State University. The numbers you provided on how much testing is actually needed to put these cars on the road is quite astounding. What are Toyota's plans for collecting that data? And maybe there could be like a shared protocol for collecting that data between different manufacturers.
So it's an excellent question. Toyota produces around 10 million cars per year. That was actually on the slides from Dr. Lim. And we believe that those cars can be a very rich source of data in the future, not only on the ADAS systems that will help to save lives, but also on human driving, and in the future on autonomous driving as well. Of course, that's only around 10% of the total cars produced around the world. And so we think that actual cars could help a lot. We expect ourselves to do millions of miles of testing. But if you need billions of miles in order to certify that the car is good, we must amplify our testing somehow. And we think that simulation is the way to do it. We, of course, must validate simulators. Professor Rod Brooks, very famous quote, said, "Simulation is doomed to succeed." That's because all of us in our academic work tend to tweak the simulation until it works. But that's not what real life is. So what we must do is to validate that the simulators are actually accurate compared to what would happen in the real world. And then we think that simulation can be used to amplify the number of miles tremendously.
Okay, thank you very much again for the nice presentation. And a short announcement. We will have a banquet this evening, and it will be the outdoor, so it might be a little bit colder in this evening, so please prepare your warm clothing. And next session will be starting from 10. Don't be late. Thank you.